I think so many people have the tendency to just put it off. Like, oh, I'm so far from exiting. I'm so far from retirement. But what happens if the unthinkable happens?
Usually when I ask people, tell me about your continuity plan, they say, I have a shareholder agreement and $19 billion of life insurance or something like that. That's not a plan. Those are tools.
Welcome back into the studio this week, guys. We have something that's really interesting to me and probably a lot of you listening out there, because a lot of our audience are either established business owners, privately held business owners, or aspiring to be so in this entrepreneurial journey. Today, we have something that is extremely important on our journey into and out of entrepreneurship and beyond. Today, we are welcoming Jim Erben into the studio. Jim represents a firm based in Austin, Texas, specializing in exit and succession planning for privately held business owners in 27 states. Jim Erben is one of the most highly sought after exit and succession experts for privately held business owners in the United States. His leadership has been recognized by Inc. 5000 list multiple years running. Jim is an established international speaker who shares his thought leadership around all things exit succession related, including business continuity and executive retention for thousands of leaders and business owners every year. Through his proprietary method, Succession by Design, Not Default, Jim helps privately held businesses navigate the complexities of comprehensive succession and exit planning to create a strategic, seamless, and successful transition with minimal risk. Everlasting legacy business owners are very well versed in revenue growth, profitability, and leadership, but their hard work can lead to devastation if there's a lack of proactive succession planning. And when you clearly define ownership, stewardship, and values, you serve each generation beyond your lifetime. As Jim likes to say, everyone will leave with a legacy. Have you decided what your legacy will be? Jim, welcome to the Dynamis Studios this week.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate the opportunity.
I am really excited to have you here and just really, really grateful for the knowledge that you are about to bless us with. Tell us, why is this important? Why is this necessary for business owners?
Well, in the next 8 to 10 years, it's estimated at about $13 trillion, that's with a T, are going to pass down from 10 million family-owned businesses that are wanting to either sell to a third party or transition down to family or key executives. There's not that much money laying around to fund these, and so it's extremely important to have a proactive plan that's going to allow the business owners to accomplish their objective.
This wealth transfer, this is essentially stemming from one of the largest generations in history reaching retirement age, correct?
Correct.
We recently had on a gentleman who specialized in business acquisition, and this is something that he's really focused on, this gray wave or the silver tsunami of retiring baby boomers who have mature books of business and no real plan of what to do with that business once they reach retirement age. Some of them have heirs, some of them have children, but some of them do not. And even the business owners that have children and have heirs and people to take on that inheritance, the children oftentimes don't want anything to do with the company. So there's a huge opportunity here on the acquisition side. But what you really focus on is preemptively setting up a strategic plan so that when we arrive at that exit point, we're not scrambling to make decisions. We're not left with holding the bag of goodies and nobody knows what to do with it. In your experience, on average, how many business owners are prepared for their exit? How many people are forward thinking and planning ahead in key executive retention and strategic exits?
Not many. And I'm going to say that we probably are exposed to 100 plus a year, maybe one or two. They all have a desire to either sell to the family or key executives or maximize their sale and take the money and run, for lack of a better expression. But every misstep, even if they're able to weather the storm and come through it on the other side, every misstep that happens along the way is financially expensive to those who do not plan. For those that have a plan, it's a lot easier to make adjustments to your plan, kind of like a sailboat. If you know your destination, it's easy to make adjustments to a sail. And if you don't have a plan, you're hoping somebody comes out and buys the business when you're ready to exit.
What are some of the costly mistakes that we're trying to alleviate here when you're working with these business owners?
They don't have a plan of what they need. So, for lack of a better expression, they don't know their number. And their number may not just be the business value, it may encompass other things, real estate, investment holdings, but they don't know what they need so that someone can quantify to them how they'll have very little risk of ever running out of money.
When you say they don't know their number, what you mean is they don't know how much they need to achieve in a sale or an exit or a buyout to retire and have no monetary demand or shortfall in the later years of their life, correct?
Yes, and they don't know how to align their personal wealth with their ultimate exit from the business, because most of the time the business is their largest asset. But usually different advisors have done the personal stuff and different lawyers and accountants and people have done the business stuff, and they never talk to one another. They're never synced. So what happens, we get a call 3 or 4 times a year. I got an offer. Great, congratulations. What do I do? Well, is it enough? I don't know. Because they don't know and they don't have a plan, they go through and they find out it's not enough, because net of taxes and everything else, they're going to have to take too big a risk to receive the money they've been receiving. But in the meantime, they've been distracted by this sale because they were going through the process of celebrating early and thinking that this was enough. And then when somebody put a pen to paper for them, it wasn't. That's one of the most costly things I see as a waste of time on offers that are not market value, and they're also not enough. I also see a failure to have a plan that attracts, rewards, and retains our key executives that are the top 5 to 15% of their full-time employees, that should be aligned and incentivized to the ultimate goal of the business succession, which is either to sell to a third party or transition to little Susie and Johnny.
When business owners come to you, how do they figure out what their number is? Is that something that you work with business owners to identify? On top of that, and when they're getting offers, if it's a fair offer, what their business is evaluated for? Because in my experience, a lot of business owners are really good at one thing in the beginning, and it over time it scales, and they grow from being an expert in one niche to working on the business instead of in the business. But typically, when you go to sell, most business owners I've talked to have almost no idea how their business is even evaluated or would be traded or transacted. Is that something that you come alongside business owners and offer guidance and advice for?
Yes, and let me explain how. It's so fascinating to me that business owners don't know the market value of their business, but they know what their $200,000 401k did last quarter. It's crazy. They have a $10, $20, $50 million business. They have no idea what the market level is and what are the key performance indicators that will help it grow, but they do know what their allocation did in large cap in their 401k. This is a great story that will answer your question, Tim. 14 years ago, I was introduced to a gentleman who heard me speak at a conference in the DFW area. He hired us to do all of the things that we've spoken about. His exact words to me were, I want to make sure that I have a plan that will let me know when I can exit comfortably and not have any risk of running out of money. I want to make sure I take care of my key people that are going to help me get there along the way. And I want to make sure if I get hit by a bus, that my family and my business does not blow up because of a lack of planning. In 2019, we told him, look, you're at a point now where your personal wealth and your business value are such that you can live happily ever after. The following year, he was sold to a third party because of COVID, wound up getting a few percent less than what the original offer was for, just like 4 or 5%. It wasn't anything large. And he was concerned that it might jeopardize the plan. And I said it had zero impact on your probability of never running out of money because of what you did over the last 14 years with your personal wealth. So you're still good if you want to exit, and they did. Now they're living happily ever after. And that was 14 years. You don't want to be running a large business where you don't know what the destination is. If your kids are small or presently not interested in the business, you don't have to decide immediately, are we doing third-party sale? Or are we doing kids, key executives? But run your business with a destination in mind. And the destination is when you arrive at the point you want to arrive where you can live happily ever after. If you haven't decided, probably by then, it'll be pretty clear to you whether it's going to be family and key employees or sell to a third party.
If you're listening to this podcast and you think like, this doesn't really apply to me, I'm just getting started in my journey. I have a small company, we're growing. At what stage in your journey of owning a company is it to somebody's advantage to come alongside you and start working with you as far as these strategic exits?
For starters, everybody needs a plan. If you're a new entrepreneur and you've started a business that's making money, you have something to lose. And if you have a family, your family has something to lose if something happens to you. So you need a continuity plan that's aligned with your family and business. Who's going to take over the business? Most of the time, people just do planning to take care of the family and then the business flounders. The business will ultimately may be your largest asset. So even if you're starting out, and I say people that are usually 15 years or beyond, just need a strong continuity plan typically. And then those that are within 1 to 10 or 15 years from an ultimate exit need to have a more structured plan that encompasses a lot of the things that they need to be looking at.
So while we're in growth mode, we can be cognizant of it, be aware of it, but really it starts to become very pressing once we reach 10 to 15 years out from retirement or an exit is really when we should be seeking out counsel as far as how to navigate and get that done.
Tim, I'm going to go back to your twin brother or sister analogy. You're 10 or 15 years out. They come up with a real strategic, well thought out plan of how they were someday going to leave the business. And you just keep doing what you're doing. Realistically, who's more likely to accomplish your objectives?
Absolutely. The person with the plan and the clarity of execution is always going to win out by far, time and time again. That's something that I have experienced from the chaos of combat in the military. When you're in that chaos, oftentimes your plan isn't going to go exactly as you think it will. There's always going to be some deviation in the execution. But as long as there's a muscle memory and a mental discipline of what actions need to be taken in the event of an emergency or during that chaos, typically the person with their eyes fixed further out on the horizon line with a rough plan does better than a person with no plan. And of course, that famous Mike Tyson saying, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Well, that's true. That is true. But, if you have a good person in your ringside corner, rubbing your shoulders and getting you ready for the next round, when we get our bell rung, what we need strong advisors. We need experts in our corner to come alongside us and point us back towards the center of the ring. And that's exactly what you're doing. And I've listened to a few of your podcasts, but something that really struck me and could speak to an entrepreneur earlier in the journey is unplanned exits, emergencies. What happens if you step off the curb tomorrow and get hit by a bus? What is the plan in place for your company so that there is retention, so that the company continues to grow and thrive and feed and support the people that you really care about? Can you talk a little bit about unplanned exit? I think so many people have the tendency to just put it off. Like, I'm so far from exiting. I'm so far from retirement. But what happens if the unthinkable happens?
Let's talk about that. Usually when I ask people, tell me about your continuity plan, they say, I have a shareholder agreement and $19 billion of life insurance or something like that. That's not a plan. Those are tools. What happens to the business? The shareholder agreement talks about what happens, who's going to own the company. Life insurance is used to pay off the family or what have you. And now the business is owned by probably someone else, maybe a partner. But who's running the business? What's being said on the telephone by the person answering it the day after you get hit by a bus? Do you want to control what's being said to your vendors, to your customers? We had an incident where a couple passed away of 2 different cancers. The business doubled in 4 years. They were getting awarded bids that they hadn't even bid yet because they were so proactive in saying, we've had a plan. We've been left by the Smith family in great position. It'll be business as usual. And the customers were so impressed with their proactive communication, they gave them the business.
Wow.
What about the key employees? They think of, poor Tim's wife. I hope she and the kids are doing okay. What's the second thing they think about?
I better look for a job.
What about me? Exactly. Do I need to call my competitor? Say, hey, something happened to Tim, and that just creates chaos. And by the way, I don't want to be remiss in thanking you for your service and providing us freedom here in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I also want to tell you, when you're in a situation and, all heck breaks loose, sometimes the plan doesn't go according. But when you have someone, when the dust settles, you get back on the plan. If you didn't have a plan, you wouldn't know what to get back on. The best thing I can tell you about a really good continuity and emergency operating plan, it dictates everything that happens when the bad thing happens.
You brought up a really good point that I hadn't even thought of until you just mentioned it. Who's answering the phone right after a tragedy happens, this unexpected thing? And initially my thought was, yeah, you don't want a emotional widow, that to fall to her. There's no way you could make great or even good business decisions in the fog of emotion. We have this huge asset that is a life source for the remaining heirs, the family. And if you have key employees without direction, openly sharing information that could potentially devalue that company, it could greatly affect a sale, which would be a subsequent inheritance to the heirs. I would imagine you want to have a really crisp plan in place, an exact SOP of, in the unthinkable, this is what we will respond with. Let's be honest, if the point of all of this planning and all of this hard work is to leave a legacy for our family, and we want to preserve that.
But what happens, we talked about the horizontal exit, if you will. What about incapacitation? I mean, there's no life insurance coming in on that. What's the plan for that if mom or dad's incapacitated and can't run the business anymore? It's kind of like if you're on a ship, you don't want to have to learn how to use the lifeboats. That's why you do the drills. You don't want to have to use them when you need them.
Right.
That's not what you want to learn. And there's just so many things that can happen. I read about a family business that had one of the family members commit a horrific crime. It wound up causing the distribution organization to go buy back the family business. It's just stripped of the family business unexpected. What's the plan there? And you can't plan for everything, but you in the military know you should plan for as many things as you can fathom.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a few times executive retention and key employee or key executive retention. Can we touch on why that is so important and so paramount and what we need to be focusing on preemptively to ensure that we do maintain that retention of those key employees and key executives?
Sure. Do you remember the Rockefeller family?
I sure do.
Long time ago, the government broke up Standard Oil. Mr. Rockefeller said, take my assets, take my companies, just give me my people and I'll rebuild. Guess what? He did. We've got a small 4-letter computer company here that starts with a D and ends with 2 L's. They started out in the 80s. They've grown because of great executives that they've had. Most of the businesses that I see that are extremely successful have a great key executive group that is aligned to help accomplish the overall objectives of the business. They're not greedy, but they want 3 things. They want to feel like they impact the business. They would like a perk above the rank and file. They kind of feel like they deserve it because they're really pouring out their heart and soul for the business. And that can be phantom stock plans, executive retention plans, SERPs, things of that nature. And the last thing, when they're coming to back the Brinks truck up to unload it for the business owner, unload the pallets of money, is there going to be anything in it for them? If you can accomplish those 3 things, notice I didn't say buy a NetJet membership. That would certainly incentivize them, but if they can go get it somewhere else, they're not going to stay where they are. If you accomplish those 3 things, I have found the key executives to be very, very ownership-like. They feel like owners. They feel like they're aligned with you, the founder or CEO, And they also know when they have a weak member of their team, go back to your military days. I mean, your team's only as good as its weakest link.
So they're essentially incentivized to see the job through, which is important because you have people left behind that are depending on a job finished and a job thoroughly well done. As far as executive retention, you're essentially saying, like, give them a slice of the pie, make it.
No, let me be clear. Give them something that looks and smells like a slice of the pie. Too many people don't think outside the 9 dots, and they're like, oh, yeah, here, Tim, here's 5% of the company. You've been great over the last couple of years. Here's 5%. And, the next thing you know, now, if I've done it for you, we've got to do it for the rest of them. There are other things that you can do without providing direct stock. Sometimes, stock appreciation rights, discounted purchase stock is great. But there are a lot of other things that are very popular that allows employees to help accumulate money, maybe to buy you out or to know what they would get in the event you sold to a third party. I mean, when you have key employees that are getting older, they need an exit themselves.
Are you able to speak at all on any of these strategies?
Phantom stock, for instance, you give like either non-voting stock or stock-like units, maybe up to 10 or 20% of the value of the company. The employees earn it over time. They vest, if you will, maybe a third every year for 3 years, every time they get another grant. You put some money aside to back up the value of it in case they have to leave early or to severance or what have you. But they always have some non-vested amount of money at work. And, the traditional retirement plans don't provide them enough. I mean, if you think about somebody making $200 or $250 a year, they can't put enough away in their 401k for them to really be able to retire without something else. For anyone that's listening here, all you have to do is reflect on if you've ever lost a key executive that was very impactful to you, or maybe a friend or a colleague. It's not fun. And you don't want to lose them because you didn't plan for them. They're helping you get to where you want to go. Incentivize them.
The strategies that you're talking about are very useful and creative, and it's exactly why people would come to you in the first place, because oftentimes people that are navigating this, they just don't know how to do this on their own. And that's okay. We're not all experts. Our strength as entrepreneurs and as business owners should be to identify our weaknesses, identify things that we're not experts in, and then work as quickly and as aggressively as possible to fill those weaknesses. On a separate podcast, I was listening to you talk about 4 main exits. One of the strategies is a no sell, an owner retiring, but not selling the company, just putting key individuals in place. And if that company starts to grow and become more profitable, it comes with a list of unexpected heartache. Can you kind of provide some clarity around these topics?
Let's talk about the why. Why is usually because mom and dad are probably 70. There's a phenomena that happens when people turn 70 and they start holding on to things real tight. So they go retire, Florida, where everybody seems to retire, except Californians that are all moving to Texas. So they move to Florida, and they're calling in every week, checking on the business, and then they're calling in every month. And then the next thing you know, you can't get them because they're too busy traveling, playing golf, doing whatever they do. If the business does great, and the key executives that are running it and or family members blow it up, I mean, they're just killing it. If something happens to mom and dad, there's a thing called a tax, an estate tax due. Or the opposite could happen. The key executives could run this business into the ground. I have inherited situations where one of the most fantastic CEOs I've ever worked with came back in to her company that she had gifted a large portion out to her kids who ran it into the ground. She resurrected it, built it back up, and sold it. Unless you're a disabled vet and you have government contracts or something, there's no reason to delay this transition. Transition the company when you're able to do so and have minimal risk of ever running out of money.
A lot of the problems that entrepreneurs and business owners encounter or their heirs encounter really stems from just the simple lack of communication. A lot of heirs, family members that inherit a business just simply wish that their parents or whoever, close to them that founded the company and grew the company would have just had a clear conversation with them up front on expectations and roles and what's going to happen and what's not going to happen, instead of just siblings standing around holding this mess, trying to figure out what to do with it.
Many times I see people that are very capable or certainly want to learn how to run the business, and mom or dad just thinks you're going to come by it through osmosis. And they don't sit down and go, Tim, here are the 5 things you need to know about the wealth we're leaving you in trust. And here are the 5 things you need to know about running the business. I use an example. If you're trying to learn to drive, which is like trying to learn to run a business, if you're not sitting in the driver's seat, you're not going to pay attention to oncoming traffic, to red lights, to people driving erratically, and all the things you have to be able to learn as a driver or a business owner. And the same thing with overseeing family's personal wealth that your parents may have left or grandparents may have left. If there are no values and expectations of what's expected of you and your siblings, then you're left to figure it out by yourself. And that's usually not very good to have a reactive communication rather than proactive. Reactive communication leads to speculation, and speculation's rarely good. But everybody that's listening to this podcast has something to leave behind that's more important than your wealth and your business. What is your legacy? What are the things that you have tried to instill in your kids along the way that aren't cryptic? My son's named after my dad. He was the best man in my wedding. But so many of the things that I learned from him, I've had to glean out of just memories like, oh yeah, he told me that, and what did that mean? Sit down with your kids when they're adults and have family meetings and talk about the expectations of you being in the Garul family. This is what we're doing. You don't have to be a part of the business. You go do whatever it is you want to do, but we expect you to work hard. If you need help, come to us. A lot of these people are out there floundering, and they don't really know what your expectations are of them. I mean, wouldn't you like to be able to sit down with your parents or grandparents and just say, can I ask you some questions? And in just all of my research and dialogue, I see businesses transition to next generations, not a lot, less than 30% due to second generation. I see us missing the big leave behind, and that is the pillars that you want your family to hopefully adhere to as they grow up and become you.
As a father myself, building something that I want to leave behind, I don't want it to just go to gluttony. I think we all, as parents, as believers, as contributing members of society, want to know that our children are going to be instilled with the fundamentals and the disciplines to contribute productively to society, to make a difference, and not just sit back and be gluttonous and live off of a trust fund. And what you're talking about, I think, is going to resonate with a lot of business owners, a lot of people who share these values and principles and ideals. And you're absolutely right. I have kids who sit in the car. We get a couple blocks from home. They have no idea where they are. And my advice to you is, if you're listening to this podcast, if you have a parent who has a legacy business that you may be in a position to inherit or take over, my advice to you is you're never going to know where you are if you don't start intentionally looking out the window and getting prepared to drive. You cannot just expect to get in the driver's seat. So if you are not the business owner and you are listening to this podcast, do the work. Start paying attention. Prepare to drive. Because at some point, you're going to get into that driver's seat, especially if there's no succession plan or strategic plan in place. You hit on something, Jim, that I was listening to in another previous episode, and you were talking about the difference between fair and equal in inheritance, because they are two vastly different things. And you gave an example that, let's say you have 4 children and you're a business owner, you have 4 children, but only one of those children are intentionally involved in the business. They're in the office, they're taking the risk, they're sacrificing. And when you die, how are we deciding to break up this legacy? How are we deciding to leave the business and this inheritance? Because equal is much different than fair in that scenario. And as a father of 3 myself, it really resonated with me. I hadn't thought about that. I'm young, I'm 35 years old, I'm growing this thing. And what does that look like moving ahead? And I guarantee you, there are many, many, many business owners right now with children who they're going to do nothing about it. They're going to sleep on it, push it under the rug, and leave this mess for after they're no longer with us. Can you just speak about the difference between fair and equal in that context?
Well, here's a good example. I've got a Midwest company, large company, third generation, getting ready to go to fourth. And the third generation, one part of the family, there's three parts to the family of G2. So G3 is running the company, and they only have 50% of the vote. And all these other cousins and what have you are receiving mailbox money while the others are working their rear end off in the business. And it wasn't intended to be like that, but it just caused some resentment because the three of them have the weight of the world on their shoulders running this mega business, and the other ones are just sitting in the bleachers wanting to make sure that their check arrives on time. I don't think that was intended. It usually never is, but I use your situation. You ever come up with a company and you leave it to one of your kids? If you don't plan for that, your will is going to say divide everything a third, a third, a third.
Yeah.
I want to make a final comment on the everlasting legacy.
Please do.
At the Olympics, they do the torch running, and the torch is passed from one person to another. And by the way, when you get the torch, that's not yours to take home or to, go paint it or, do whatever. That torch is meant for you to carry to the next person. Now, in the legacy you're going to leave behind, if you're getting a torch that's leaking, or maybe it's not the legacy that you want to pass on, you at least have the beginning torch, and you can do your own repairs on it, if you will, and enhancements before you pass it to the next generation. Because things happen. But that legacy, that torch that you're going to pass on to your kids needs to be proactive, not reactive. They don't need to learn about the torch after you passed.
Absolutely. I guarantee you, just as my curiosity was sparked, it's why I wanted you on the show. I heard your content. It resonated with me. I said, not only does this apply to my family right now, my parents, it applies to me and the legacy I'm building for my children. Speaking about everlasting legacy and you, how do people get in touch with you?
Probably best at jimerben.com/invest. If you want a copy of our newsletter, learn more about what we do, that's probably the best place to do it. We love what we do. I have a great team. We really have fun, great clients. We love helping people, and we love the concept of thank you. And we've done a good job.
Thank you. Honestly, this has been a pleasure. And before we get out of here, is there anything else that you would like to direct our audience towards?
If you don't take anything out of the time that you've listened to today, proactive communication eliminates speculation. Reactive communication promotes speculation, and it is rarely good. Be proactive with them about it, communicating the things that are important in your mind and find out the things that are important to them. I don't want to be remiss and leave here and not thank you and anybody else listening to this for your service. Something that no one should take for granted, because the reason I'm able to come up and speak today is because of the freedoms we have in this country, because of people like you and millions of others.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Don't underestimate what you're doing, because the backbone of America is found on Main Street, and what you are doing is preserving that.
True.
You're preserving that and protecting that and ensuring that there's a legacy that is passed down generationally, and that is the message of this show. We are here to preserve Main Street. Servitude doesn't start when you're 18 years old in the U.S. military and end when you get out. No. All of us have an obligation as free citizens who live in this country, who worship as we please, who work as we please, who live where we please. All of us have an obligation to stand up and be proactive and preserve what it is that makes this country better than every other country in the world. We have an obligation to autonomy, financial freedom, independence. And we cannot do that by being controlled. We cannot do that by being put in a box, by letting the perpetual creep of socialism and communism and all of these leftist ideologies that creep in. We need to preserve what it is we love, and we need to protect it. And it starts on Main Street. So Jim, do not undermine what you are doing, because you are leaving a legacy for generations to come in the preservation of this great nation that I love and continue to serve. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
All you out there in the Dynamis audience, as always, continue to like, subscribe, give us a review, and share this with your friends, because we are here to make a difference, to make an impact. Jim, thank you so much for all of your time today. And Dynamis, we will catch you on the flip side.